for inviting me to speak. So my name is Klaus Röhrig. I'm a policy coordinator at Climate Action Network Europe, and I was just asked to give a bit our take on the package. So let me briefly just share my screen. I have a couple of slides, and maybe for those of you who don't know Can Europe, so we are a network of NGOs from across Europe, 170 plus organizations at the moment, and I'm working for the secretariat representing these in Brussels, and we focus mainly on influencing EU climate and energy policy, but also in a lot of collaboration also with our national members and also reliance on our national members. And of course, if you have any questions on our organization, feel free to reach out to me also after. So I will do just a quick take a bit on our assessment of the climate files of the Fit for 55 package, or the main files that we in the Can Europe Secretariat are following, and the question on what are kind of the priority issues that we will focus on when we will try to influence them now in the negotiation process. So I will first give a bit of context and overview of the package. I hope I will not repeat too much what Mrs. Della Torre already said. Then I will talk a bit about the level of ambition of the proposals, and also look a bit into the changes of the policy architecture that the new package is proposing, and then in the end follow up with some more top-line demands for the main key files, the climate files that we are following mainly. So maybe just to zoom out a bit and to look also a bit into the context of the Fit for 55 package proposal that we had this summer. You, I think, are all aware that this is also kind of a consequence of a whole line of political decisions at the EU level. So we first had the long-term strategy was discussed and adopted by the EU, and then following from this also the 2030 overall target, the NDC was increased. So there the Commission last year submitted a proposal, the climate target plan, and then in December heads of state and government agreed to increase the EU NDC to this new target of at least minus 55 net emissions, so the target that also now takes into account carbon removals in comparison to the old target of minus 40% on the emission reductions. And now the European Council as well gave the mandate to the Commission to actually propose this Fit for 55 package, so a revision of the entire or of the main EU climate and energy policy framework, which then the Commission, after also a public consultation, presented in July this year, so just before the summer. And now we are in the moment of deliberations in the Parliament and the EU Council. But I will not go so much into detail. I think also Mrs. Della Torre has explained the different initiatives already quite well. So we actually have different pillars in the Fit for 55 package, and also quite a long list of single policy initiatives and policy files that are being proposed. Within Can Europe, within our organization, we are focusing mainly on 5 of those initiatives. So we have been mainly active also on pushing for an increase of the overall EU's 2030 target in the last years. And we're also now still focusing on those files that have, that actually really implement this climate target in the climate files. So this is mainly the EU Emissions Trading System Directive, the Effort Sharing Regulation, or that's sometimes also referred to as the Climate Action Regulation, and the LULUCF regulation. I think also this was discussed before, right? The ETS, the Emissions Trading System, is currently covering industry, power sector, aviation sectors. while the effort sharing regulation covers all the emissions from those sectors that are not covered by the ETS at the moment. So this would be transport, buildings, agriculture, waste incineration, and then the LULUCF that deals with the natural carbon removals. At the same time, we also have a team that is following the revisions of the energy files, so mainly the Renewable Energies Directive and the Energy Efficiencies Directive. So this is also in kind of as part of a whole campaign on energy transition and kind of a move towards 100% renewable energies, energy-based Europe. So we are trying now as well to kind of coordinate our work there as much as possible. And as was also mentioned before, that is a bit the complexity of having so many different files coming into revision at the same moment. So when we now look at the ambition level of the package, the challenge is that the old policy framework was still aligned with the -40% targets. And this is now the moment where we can actually push for the whole system to be revised to deliver much, much higher emission reductions by 2030. And the Commission has proposed the new proposals or has proposed the revisions so that in the end, they would all align with this new target of at least net 55%. But when we actually look at the situation, and I mean, this was also mentioned before, also in the question, our assessment would be that the EU is still not in line, even with this new target of -55% net, to represent a fair share of the EU's contribution to the 1.5-degree goal. And actually, this graph that you see here is a bit of a sneak preview from a report that we are only about to launch today, where we actually look into what would be a 1.5 consistent pathway for the EU and also for a number of member states. So what we are pushing for also now is that we see the at least 55% net target as really the kind of the floor of ambition that we need to reach. But we also have the at least suffix prefix. So we are kind of counting on putting pressure on the co-legislators to make sure that ultimately at the adoption of the different files, the EU manages to actually exceed and go well beyond the at least 55% net target. As NGOs, we are calling for an emission target of at least 65% reductions. That doesn't take into account LULUCF carbon removals. So carbon removals should come in addition and separately to this -65%. This is also, of course, corroborated by the latest assessment of the UNFCCC and the UN synthesis report, where we also see that globally we are really far off track, and there is still a high need for collective NDCs to be upscaled, and of course we see changes and signals also from around the world, but we still we would still call on the EU to make sure that also domestically they go to the highest ambition level possible, and then of course also to really ramp up their climate diplomacy, especially now at the COP in Glasgow. But for its credibility, we believe that it's also essential that they make sure that their domestic policies are aligned with the 1.5 goal. So maybe just as a kind of very top line assessment of the proposals, where we, just to kind of compare a bit our position as Europe's position on the kind of overall 2030 target with the Commission's proposal. We have all colored them in red at the moment because we still feel that they still do not deliver up to their potential. So while we are calling for an overall EU target of at least 65%, we are also calling for the implementing legislation, so for the emissions trading system and the effort sharing regulation, to have increased levels of ambition. And there we are seeing, for example, that for the ETS, the Commission has proposed a -61% target, which actually is also even on the lower band of the range that they have analyzed in the impact assessment. So we actually, and we have some countries as well, such as France, that have been already vocally calling for a 60% target for the ETS. So yeah, we're quite critical of this approach that the Commission did not suggest targets that could actually go beyond the at least 55, but they kind of stuck to this ambition floor, so to say. The same thing for LULUCF. Our network, we are calling for a massive increase, substantial increase in the EU's carbon removal capacity, and there also the Commission's proposal is rather weak. Some positive signs, although it's also in red, is maybe on the energy targets. I mean, we have been pushing also for energy targets to be again binding at national level. So this is something that the Commission now fortunately has proposed under the Renewable Energies Directive, which it's positive, but we still see a lot of potential to actually increase the 2030 target also for the Renewables Energy Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive. Also, as a background, we have developed in recent years the so-called Paris Agreement compatible energy scenario, or short the PAC scenario, where we have also co-developed this with our members and also with the European Environmental Bureau to give a bit of more evidence for why such higher targets are actually achievable or possible and feasible. So we will continue also now in the negotiations to push for these higher targets. Then maybe quickly also on the architecture. As I mentioned before already, there has been a change actually in the nature of the EU's overall target. The 40% target didn't really de facto consider LULUCF. They just treated it as like a zero contribution. So the 40% was really just achieved through a combination of the emissions trading system and the effort sharing regulation. And then combined, they should achieve 40%, while the new target, the minus 55% net, is a contribution of the mitigation from ETS, ESR, and then also the carbon removals from LULUCF, which could operate as a bit of a flexibility between mitigation, which we were quite concerned about. But the Commission last year actually proposed even more significant changes to the policy architecture. So, for example, one option that was being proposed was to repeal the effort sharing regulation altogether and therefore nationally binding greenhouse gas emission targets. There was also an idea of having a unified ETS that would be just extended from the current sectors to new sectors, such as transport and building. And there was also the danger that this new kind of ETS-only approach would affect the existing standards and regulatory approaches. So we were very afraid that the Commission would kind of bank everything on the carbon pricing mechanism and then go for lower CO2 standards, for example, for cars and vans. But when we saw the Fit for 55 package, that is something that is, I mean, some, I think, of our demands have been heard. So we had a big campaign also against these threats over the last year. And the Commission also told us, we heard the call not only from NGOs, but from also member states, that there is still a need for the effort sharing regulation to remain in place. So the ESR is here to stay for now, at least until 2030. And we would also call for the ESR to continue to exist also after 2030. And the ESR continuation was also complemented by relatively strong CO2 standards, as also Mrs. De La Torre has explained before. So this fear that standards would be kind of deprioritized was a bit mitigated with the proposal of the package. But at the same time, something that we were very skeptical and continue to be very skeptical about is this new ETS that is being proposed. It's part of the ETS directive, but it actually establishes a whole new and adjacent emissions trading system for transport and buildings. But like a small victory, I would say at least, was that at the same time, these sectors would still remain in the effort sharing regulation. So this new ETS is basically proposed as one policy option to achieve emission reductions in those sectors that should kind of support member states to actually then achieve their nationally binding targets under the effort sharing regulation. Of course, there was also other issues. There were discussions about integration of LULUCF and the agricultural sector already now before 2030. This is also something that hasn't been now proposed under the package. So I think for the architecture, we are still criticizing the fact that LULUCF or carbon removals are actually counting for the new overall targets. But we will then work on ensuring that the flexibilities between those and the kind of mitigation policy is as low and limited as possible. So I will now go a bit through some main takeaways for each of these three files, so the ETS, the effort sharing regulation, and the LULUCF regulation, and then also happy to hear questions from your side. So this is really just a bit of an overview, general points on each of those issues. Also to say, I am following the ETS directive, and I have colleagues that are following the effort sharing regulation and LULUCF regulation in more detail. So please forgive me if I can't give you too many detailed response on effort sharing regulation and LULUCF, but I will try my best. So when we look at the emissions trading system directive, we already saw that the overall level of ambition still has a lot of potential to be increased. So that's what we will still be calling for also in the upcoming revision. Another element that is very important under the EU's carbon market is this historical surplus of emissions, which can be addressed through the market stability reserve. And the Commission has also proposed some significant changes to this reserve that will actually lead to a substantial decrease of the surplus. But we still see that these proposals do not go far enough. So we still think there should be a lot of improvements also to the system, that so that actually the ETS can get rid of all the surplus allowances in the coming decade. So there's still room for improvement. And then one of the biggest scandals, I would say, even like one of the biggest disasters in the ETS proposal is the Commission failed to phase out free allocation to industry. So at the moment, the Commission has proposed to implement and introduce the carbon border adjustment mechanism, or the CBAM. And that means that there will be a slow phase out of free allocation for industry, but it will be extended and go until 2035. And this for us is something that is not acceptable. I mean, we have been calling for applying the polluter pays principle across the ETS sectors. And we have seen in the past also that energy intensive industries has actually benefited from billions of windfall profits coming from free allocation, and still a failure of those industries to actually put significant investment into low carbon technology and research. So we believe that this is something that definitely needs to change. This also raises a lot of questions if we talk about a new ETS that might increase the carbon price for low-income households. It remains quite unacceptable that now low-income households suddenly need to pay more, while industry still gets nearly 100% of their emission allowances for free. So this will be a big focus also on our demands on the ETS. A positive thing that was also mentioned by the Commission is that now all revenue has to go to climate action, but there's also still room for improvement, especially when it comes to the monitoring of how governments actually spend the revenue. There are very sharp differences between member states. and very limited kind of powers to the Commission to give sanctions or to kind of follow up and scrutinize this revenue use. So this still should also be improved. When it comes to the new ETS, I guess that also in Slovenia, this is usually in most countries has been drawing a lot of attention. So also we as an NGO network, we are still trying to assess the proposal. We are quite very skeptical against it, mainly also because of the uncertainty about the social impacts. We're not really sure if the design that the Commission has proposed will be effective enough to actually reach the most vulnerable households. So there needs to be some guarantee that the money is actually recycled and ends up where it is also needed the most. And then we would also always see the need for having complementary measures. So like it was positive to see that we have stronger car standards, but it would remain very, very important that the ETS should not be the flagship policy to address emission reductions in these sectors. So we are at the moment still defining our position. It still remains quite critical of the proposal, but we are still developing our position a bit in more detail, or our common lines. Maybe just some insights from the impact assessment as well. I mean, we have the Commission looks into quite diverse or is expecting quite diversified impacts also on different member states, especially in terms of price impacts, for example, on heating fuels, with significant price increases on coal heating. And then, also, I mean, those are the numbers that they present for the expected price increase for transport fuels. One issue that is still a bit of a question mark, this table is also from the impact assessment that shows a bit the expected additional emission reductions stemming from the this new ETS, where the Commission says that this policy proposal would achieve 9% additional emission cuts across the EU. So this is the first line here, the EU like minus 9%. For Slovenia, this would be minus 7%, but there's also still a lot of questions about the assumptions of the Commission. So we're still waiting to get maybe more kind of more background and more data about this expected emission reductions from the ETS2. Then maybe very quickly also on the effort sharing regulation. So positive is that we actually still have the effort sharing regulation. It's still in place. National binding targets will remain in place. Also the same scope remains. There's some, I mean, still what is quite critical is the level of ambition. We would still need to push for the overall EU target to be increased, and also to increase pressure on member states to ensure that then the nationally binding targets are also increased and brought in line with what we would consider 1.5 degree consistent pathways. And also what was mentioned by the Commission before, something that we see very critical is the continuation of the loopholes. So there's a big push for having increased flexibility and ways that member states could kind of trade either their annual allocations with each other, or to trade it off, for example, against credits that they generated under the LULUCF regulation. And of course, what we want to see is that member states actually have quite a stringent pressure and incentives to achieve quick and early emission reductions as much as possible. So there's also a whole element of governance that should be introduced and that could still be improved. And then maybe lastly then on the LULUCF regulation, as mentioned before already, I mean, the good thing is we have a separate target now and actually a target to increase the removal capacity, which is something positive, but it's still kind of architecture-wise, we kind of see this integration of LULUCF and agriculture with under the so-called AFOLU pillar being envisaged by the Commission as of 2031. We see this still quite critical, and then also the ambition level is not really using the potential that we see for the increase of natural carbon removals. Accounting has improved, but yeah, we still see also a bit of lags with synergies, for example, with the biodiversity strategy that need to be addressed a bit better. So maybe just to finish, now the road ahead, I mean, you all know this as well. Now the files are being discussed by the European Parliament and the Council, and we see them now as the main target to ensure that they are responsible for ensuring that the overall level of ambition can still go beyond and overshoot the at least 55 target. And we definitely see that it is possible, and that even the Commission has given some evidence in the impact assessment that some of the files can still increase in ambition. A lot of progress now is expected under also the upcoming French presidency, and of course also under the Slovenian presidency ongoing. But also the process still is not entirely clear yet. So for example, the role of the European Council is still to be determined. So we don't know exactly at what point in time the European Council will also get back to the matter. Yeah, I will stop here and stop sharing my screen. Thanks.
So this time it was my fault. Apologies, Klaus. Hopefully you hear me now. Stay with us for a little bit longer, so we see if there are any questions from the audience. Če kakšno vprašanje iz občinstva? Morda za Klausa. Apparently not. So I'll have a question if I may, Klaus. You've already mentioned the industry gets the free ride up until 2035, apparently. But we do hear that the industry, at least in Slovenia, is already complaining and saying that there's too much strain being put on the industry with this package. What would be your reply, or what would you say about it?
Yeah, I mean, this is of course something that we have heard from the industry, not only now with the package, but this is something that is a bit consistent. I mean, it depends a bit. So, I mean, we can understand some concerns, especially in terms of investment gaps. We definitely see there is a huge challenge to make sure that that industry can transform towards climate neutrality, or towards at least very, very significant reduction of emissions by 2050. But there's the industry and there's the industry. So we have actually quite a diverse fields. And the problem is a bit that maybe those industry actors that are the loudest in complaining are usually those that have really failed to invest in the past, and that have also maybe reaped a lot of kind of side benefits of the current regime with the free allocation, where they were over supplied with free allowances, and they managed to then sell the oversupplied allowances on the market, therefore making these windfall profits that for us, yeah, doesn't make any sense. This is a bit of an extra subsidy for these big polluters. And then at the same time, you have some smaller, like usually smaller voices within the industry that have actually gone forward with making kind of pilot projects for significant kind of technological improvements. I mean, very known is this hybrid project, for example, for the carbon-free steel making. But these are usually not the big voices of industry. So, I mean, what I think we as NGOs need to prepare for is that we need to question the kind of overall narrative that we have with the carbon leakage, argument, where we still lack actually any kind of clear evidence that the current regime really prevents carbon leakage. We haven't really seen carbon leakage in the past, so it's it's a very kind of fraudulent narrative, but it's a narrative that actually sticks very well with policymakers. So I think we should be a bit harsher on industry, saying that you've had time enough for this transitionary measure. You didn't really use it to invest and to transition. Like any kind of system that now should support you in the transition has to be tied with very clear conditionalities. So yeah, because yeah, we have too much evidence that the current system just has been a total obstacle. I mean, we have the windfall profits. We also have the report of the EU Court of Auditors that has said that the free allocation regime is ineffective, is not targeted enough. Yeah, so I think we probably need to respond in this way, like a more stricter kind of bad cop approach, saying the current system has to change. You need to pay a price for pollution, but at the same time also acknowledging the challenge and also making sure that there is now sufficient investment, but then really only for those industries that are willing to change and to implement the solutions.
Thank you. I can only agree with that. Prosim, če še kakšno vprašanje, sicer bomo počasi naredili odmor. Dobro. Klaus, thank you for taking the time for presenting the views of Can Europe on the specific files of the package, and best of luck with your advocacy work further down the line.
Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me, and have a great day and event still.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.